A single room. 42 feet long, 19 feet wide, with concrete walls painted the color of old bone. The year is 1958. The address is Stage 7, Warner Brothers Lot, Burbank, California. The time is 3:47 in the afternoon on a Thursday in late October, and the smell inside that room is gun oil, sawdust, and the particular metallic sharpness of a prop master's workbench after a full day's use. There are 11 people in that room. 9 of them are not moving. 2 of them are. One is 6 feet 4 inches tall, 220 pounds, with hands the size of a Sunday roast and eyes that have stared down cameras for 23 years without once flinching. He is holding a Colt single-action Army revolver, and he is not looking at the gun. He is looking at the man across from him. The other man is 6 feet 4 inches tall, 28 years old, 195 pounds of lean, coiled, California desert readiness. He is holding an identical revolver. And he has just said something that the 9 other people in that room will spend the rest of their lives trying not to repeat out loud. The silence that follows lasts 4 seconds. It feels like a geological era. And then John Wayne does something nobody in that room expects. He doesn't draw. He doesn't speak. He sets the gun down on the table beside him, very slowly, like a man placing a book back on a shelf he's read 100 times. This is that story. Warner Brothers in 1958 was not a studio. It was a city inside a city, a 43-acre sovereign republic of ambition and organized chaos that employed more than 900 people on any given weekday. Stage 7 sat near the northeast corner of the lot, past the costume warehouse and the horse stables, close enough to the back fence that you could hear the sound of Olive Avenue traffic bleeding through the walls when the ventilation was off. The room that mattered was not the stage itself. It was the Armory Annex, a supplemental prop storage space that the lot's head prop master, a 44-year-old Texan named Roy Garland, had converted into a functional firearms training room sometime in 1954. Garland had nailed canvas targets to a frame of 2x4s at the far end, laid rubber matting across the concrete floor, and hung a single bare bulb on a swivel arm that let him angle the light. It was not a formal range. It was a working man's space, which is exactly why John Wayne liked it. Wayne had been using Garland's annex 2 or 3 afternoons a week for the better part of 6 years by the time October 1958 came around. Not for films, he was between productions that month, but because he believed that the men who played gunfighters on screen owed something to the craft. He had said this privately, to anyone who would listen. A man who can't handle a firearm authentically has no business asking an audience to believe he's anything other than an actor. That was not humility. That was professional standard setting, and Wayne applied it to himself first. He arrived at Stage 7 that Thursday at 2:15 in the afternoon, wearing a brown canvas work jacket and a plain gray shirt, no hat. He shook Roy Garland's hand with both of his. He spent 40 minutes working single-action draws from a cross-draw rig, a left-hip holster that Garland had configured for a character in a Western television project that Wayne was advising on. He fired 36 rounds. He was not satisfied with his split times and said so. Then he sat down on a wooden stool and drank black coffee from a thermos and watched Garland fiddle with the swivel arm. That is when Clint Eastwood walked in. It is worth pausing here to understand exactly who Clint Eastwood was in October 1958, because the distance between who he was then and who he would become is the entire engine of what happened next. Eastwood was not yet famous. He was known. There is a difference. As the second lead on a CBS television western called Rawhide, which had completed its first season and was preparing to film its second. The character he played, Rowdy Yates, was a trail hand with good cheekbones and a simmer beneath the surface that the camera noticed before most directors did. Eastwood had been working as an actor since 1955, accumulating small parts in Universal Pictures and television episodes, earning a reputation among assistant directors as someone who was always on time, never argued with blocking, and remembered his lines on the first day of the shoot. He was also, by the testimony of 4 separate people who worked alongside him during this period, profoundly competitive. Not in the loud way. Eastwood was never loud about anything, but in the way a river is competitive with the channel it runs through. He pressed against every boundary he encountered until something gave. He wanted to be better than whoever was next to him at the craft. He wanted it the way some men want money, quietly and without apology. He had arranged, through a mutual acquaintance in Warner's television division, to use Garland's annex that same afternoon. He had not known Wayne would be there, or so he said afterward. Eastwood was accompanied by two other men. A younger actor named Dale Gibson, 24 years old and 3 rawhide episodes into his career, and a rawhide stunt coordinator named Frank Hughes, who had been working on Western productions since 1947. They carried their own holster rigs. Eastwood had been practicing his draw for 3 months by this point, working with Hughes twice a week, and by every measurable account, he had become genuinely skilled. Hughes had timed him at 0.38 seconds from leather to hammer fall, a number that would hold up against any working Western actor in Hollywood that year. He walked into the annex at 3:31 in the afternoon, saw John Wayne sitting on the stool, and did not turn around. Here's where the temperature in that room began to change. Wayne didn't stand up when Eastwood came in. He didn't do anything. He sat on the stool with the thermos of coffee held in both hands and watched the 3 younger men arrange themselves near Garland's workbench with the particular calm of a man who has already made all the decisions he needs to make for the day. This was his natural register. People who met John Wayne for the first time often described, afterward, a strange experience of spatial recalibration, as if the room he entered had been the wrong size before he arrived and had corrected itself upon his appearance. He was not the tallest man on many sets he worked. He was not always the most decorated or the most technically sophisticated. But there was something in the way he occupied his own perimeter that communicated a kind of absolute territorial certainty that other men simply did not possess. Roy Garland, who saw Wayne in that annex dozens of times, described it years later to a journalist from a trade publication. He had the stillness of a man who knew he'd already won, except he didn't think about it that way. He just sat the way he sat. It was everyone else who got nervous. Eastwood knew who Wayne was. Every working actor in Hollywood in 1958 knew who John Wayne was. 14 years of being the industry's top box office draw. The Searchers 2 years prior. Fort Apache, she wore a yellow ribbon, Rio Grande. The man had made more westerns than most directors had made films. His technical knowledge of period-accurate horsemanship and firearms work was not reputation management. It was documented, witnessed, and genuine. When Eastwood set his holster rig on Garland's workbench, Wayne's eyes moved toward it once, briefly, the way a chess player's eyes move across the board at the start of a match. Then he looked back at his coffee. Frank Hughes saw that look. He said something quietly to Eastwood. Eastwood did not respond to whatever was said. He buckled the rig around his hip with practiced, economical movements, checked the set of the holster twice, and turned toward the target frame. And then he drew. The draw was good. There was no other word for it. Hughes had coached him well, and Eastwood had absorbed the coaching the way he absorbed everything, completely, without waste, without flourish. The motion was clean and fast, a single fluid arc from hang to level, and the hammer fell at exactly the right moment. Garland, watching from the side, put it at 0.36 seconds, 200ths faster than the number Hughes had clocked at the previous week's session. Eastwood reset the rig and did it again. Then a third time. Each draw marginally sharper than the last. Each one accompanied by the particular silence of a man who is not performing the act but executing it. After the fourth draw, he turned around. John Wayne was still sitting on the stool. What Eastwood said at this point has been recounted by 4 of the 11 people in that room. Garland, Hughes, Gibson, and a Warner Brothers grip named Sam Polito, who had been repairing a rig mount in the corner and had not been noticed by anyone. The accounts vary slightly in phrasing, as witness accounts always do. But they agree on the shape of it. Eastwood said something to the effect of, "You want to see if that's faster than whatever you've been doing?" He wasn't smiling when he said it. He was not aggressive in any conventional sense. He said it the way he said most things, flat, even declarative, with the question at the end serving less as an invitation and more as a measurement. He was 28 years old, and he was very fast, and he had just done it in front of 11 people, and he wanted to know where the ceiling was. 9 people in that room went very still. Roy Garland took 3 steps toward the workbench and picked up a clipboard. Later he said he didn't know why he did that. It was a reflexive need to be holding something. Dale Gibson, the younger actor, looked at the floor. Frank Hughes, who had been coaching Eastwood and knew better than anyone in that room what a 0.36-second draw meant in practical terms, looked directly at Wayne with an expression that multiple witnesses later described as something between professional pride and the kind of preemptive wince a man makes when he knows something is about to go wrong. Wayne looked at Eastwood for a long moment. Then he looked at the gun in Eastwood's hand. Then he looked back at Eastwood. He did not stand up. He set down his thermos. What happened next did not take long. That is the first thing to understand about it. The whole of it, from the moment Wayne stood up from the stool to the moment he sat back down, was approximately 90 seconds. But the 11 people in that room spent decades trying to account for it. Wayne stood up from the stool with the deliberate, unhurried movement of a man rising from a chair at the end of dinner. He walked to the workbench. He picked up the Colt single-action Army revolver he had been using earlier. The cross-draw rig had been set aside, and this was a standard right-hip configuration. And he buckled it on without looking at the buckle, the way a man puts on a watch he has owned for 20 years. He walked to the mark. The rubber matting, 14 feet from the canvas target. In the first second, he stood completely still. His right hand was hanging at his side. His shoulder was not rolled forward, not canted outward, not telegraphing anything. It was simply hanging there, slightly behind the seam of his hip. In the second, he was still standing still. This was the thing that unsettled people later when they tried to explain it. Eastwood's draw, and every fast draw they had seen demonstrated on that lot, always involved a visible gathering. A microcoil in the shoulder, a breath held, an index of readiness. Wayne showed none of it. He looked like a man waiting for a streetcar. In the third second, his hand moved. Roy Garland would later say he did not see the draw itself. This was not false modesty. Garland had been timing draws for 6 years in that annex, and he had a calibrated eye for the motion. What he saw was the before and the after with a gap between them that his memory could not fill. The gun was in the holster. And then the gun was level and the hammer was down and the target had a hole in it at center mass. Garland did not time it. He said later that he had forgotten he was holding the clipboard. The hole in the canvas was centered. Not approximately centered, at the mid-sternum of the silhouette, the point that marksmen call the vital triangle. Wayne looked at the hole for 2 seconds. Then he looked at Eastwood. Nobody on that set moved. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Frank Hughes counted them, he said later, because he needed something to do with the part of his brain that was not processing what he had just seen. That's not a fast draw. That is something that does not have a name in the vocabulary of speed and accuracy that these men used. A draw at the speed Wayne had just executed, with the accuracy Wayne had just demonstrated, at a man who had been working single-action technique for decades and who was doing it at 51 years old in a work jacket in the middle of a Thursday afternoon. That was not a competition result. That was a statement about the relationship between time spent and mastery achieved that none of the 10 other people in that room had a framework to dispute. But here's where it changes. Wayne did not look at Eastwood the way a man looks at someone he has bested. He looked at him the way a contractor looks at a foundation he has just tested, with interest and without condescension, running a professional assessment on something he respects. He holstered the gun. Not fast, deliberately, carefully, the way a craftsman stores a tool he values. Then he walked back to the stool, picked up his thermos, and poured himself the last of the coffee. He had not said a word from the moment he stood up to the moment he sat back down. Eastwood stood at the mark for 3 seconds after that. Then he unbuckled his holster rig and set it on the bench with both hands. That physical consequence, the setting down of the rig with both hands, which no one had asked him to do and which served no tactical or practical purpose, was the thing that Garland, Hughes, Gibson, and Polito all remembered as the moment they understood what had just happened. Not the draw. The rig on the workbench laid flat, with both hands. That's not defeat. That's recognition. The 9 other people in the room found reasons to be elsewhere within the next 4 minutes. Garland remembered that he needed to check a parts order. Gibson and the grip Polito went for coffee. Hughes walked Eastwood's rig back to the equipment locker at the far end of the stage. The room emptied the way rooms empty when 2 people need to be left alone inside something that has just happened. Wayne and Eastwood were alone for approximately 12 minutes. Neither man spoke about this period in any public record, any interview, or any documented conversation with a third party until much later, and when they did, neither offered much detail. What has been reconstructed comes from what each man said, separately, at different times, to different people, about the principles involved, and from Roy Garland's account of the conversation he overheard while coming back through the stage door before the 12 minutes were up. Garland said Wayne spoke first. That in itself was notable, because Wayne never spoke first in confrontations. But this was not a confrontation anymore. What Wayne said in Garland's account was approximately this. The problem with a fast draw is that it's a thing you can see. The thing you can't see is the 10,000 times you put it down before it got fast. Eastwood did not respond immediately. He looked at the target frame. Then he said something to the effect that he had been working the draw for 3 months. Wayne said, "I know. And it's good. That's not the point." There was a pause. Wayne said, "The point is that I don't draw fast. I draw at the right time. Those are not the same thing. A man who draws fast draws when he's ready. A man who draws at the right time draws when the situation is ready. The camera doesn't see fast. The camera sees true." This was the philosophical anchor of everything that followed. Not speed. Not accuracy. Timing as an expression of understanding. Understanding of the story, the character, the moment, the audience's nervous system. The technical precision was subordinate to the narrative truth. A draw that was fast but arrived before the scene required it was not mastery. A draw that was slower and arrived exactly when the audience had been prepared to receive it. That was craft. Eastwood said in Garland's account one sentence. It was, "That's not what they taught me." Wayne said, "No, it's not." Then he finished his coffee. Before he left the annex, Wayne did something that Garland, who had returned fully by this point and was pretending to reorganize a shelf, saw clearly. He picked up Eastwood's holster rig from the workbench, the one Eastwood had laid down with both hands, and held it up, examining the angle of the holster relative to the belt. He made a small adjustment to the cant with his thumb. Then he laid it back down. He said to Eastwood, "For degrees. The grip sits 4 degrees too vertical. Try it at a slight forward cant. You'll get another 200ths off the draw, but more importantly, the set will look cleaner on camera. The audience needs to see the decision to draw, not just the result of it." He picked up his jacket from the stool. He shook Eastwood's hand. Eastwood's hand, multiple sources confirm, was very still when he took Wayne's. Years later, 11 years, in fact, the production of a film called Paint Your Wagon brought Eastwood together with a generation of younger actors and crew who would later recall his behavior on set with a particular consistency that, once you know the context, is not surprising at all. Eastwood's approach to technical preparation by 1969 was, by every account from everyone who worked with him, almost unsettling in its thoroughness. He did not simply rehearse. He drilled. He worked with weapons consultants, horsemen, and historical advisors not to achieve a convincing facsimile, but to understand the underlying truth of the action well enough to deliver it at the right moment in the story. He had a phrase he used with actors he was directing. By then he had begun directing himself. That became something of a known quantity among anyone who worked with him more than once. The phrase was, "Don't be fast. Be ready." Nobody who heard him say it in 1969, 1971, or 1973 knew where it came from. He never attributed it. He said it the way a man repeats a principle that has long since dissolved into the foundation of how he operates, no longer traceable to a single source because it has become structural. Don Siegel, who directed Eastwood in Coogan's Bluff and later in Dirty Harry, recalled in a 1979 interview that Eastwood had this philosophy about timing that was deeper than most actors I've worked with. He talked about how the audience needs to see the decision, not the result. Siegel assumed it was something Eastwood had worked out himself over years of practice. He had no reason to think otherwise. The 4 degrees of cant on the holster, incidentally, is something that Eastwood carried into every production he did for the next decade. Frank Hughes, who went on to work with Eastwood on several of his early directorial projects, confirmed this in a 2003 interview for a Western Clippings retrospective, noting that Eastwood was very specific about holster configuration in a way that most actors never cared about and couldn't explain to you in technical terms, but he always could. Dale Gibson, the youngest man in that annex that day, went on to work as a stunt coordinator himself, spending 31 years on Western and action productions. He gave one interview about that October afternoon in 1991 to a film historian writing a book about Warner Brothers Television in the late 1950s. The interview was not included in the final text of the book. Gibson described the draw, both draws, Wayne's and Eastwood's, in technical terms, but when the historian asked him what he took away from the afternoon personally, he said this: "I stopped worrying about being fast. I started worrying about being true." I think that's what Wayne did to most people who spent any real time watching him. 11 people. For seconds of silence. One principle that moved through 4 decades like water moving through limestone. Now come back to the frozen moment. A concrete room, 42 feet long. A canvas target with a centered hole. a holster rig laid flat on a workbench with both hands, and a 28-year-old man standing at a rubber mat, very still, having just understood something he will spend the next 50 years applying without ever fully explaining where it came from. The question the audience was asked to hold at the beginning was simple. What does a man do when the demonstration is finished? The answer was, he sets the gun down. Not because he lost. Not because he surrendered. Because he understood. And understanding, in Wayne's framework, was always the end of the argument. Silence was not weakness. It was precision. The response that arrived exactly when it was needed, no earlier and no later, carrying no excess and leaving nothing out. One room. One afternoon. One lesson that Hollywood almost forgot to write down. But here's the question that doesn't have an answer yet. Not in any transcript, not in any studio record, not in anything either man ever said publicly. There was a 15th round in that session. Roy Garland mentions it obliquely in a 1986 letter to a colleague that turned up in a film history archive in Burbank. He writes that after Eastwood left and before Wayne finished his coffee, Wayne fired one more round into the canvas target. From the same mark, at a distance of 14 feet. Garland says the hole landed in exactly the same place as the first one. He doesn't explain why Wayne did it. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe nobody does. But there's one conversation that took place in that annex that John Wayne never discussed publicly. Not in any of the 67 interviews he gave in the decade that followed, not in the memoir he dictated and never finished, not in any correspondence that has surfaced since. What happened after that final round, when Garland turned to ask him about it, and Wayne looked at the target for a long moment before answering. What he said in that moment, and whether it had anything to do with Clint Eastwood at all, that's a story for another time.